All right, so we're going to get started with step 5, which is close the deal. Closing the deal will entail raising capital, typically, if you're in a syndication. So you're going to have what's called a PPM document, private placement memorandum. You're going to have a subscription agreement. Uh, and this can all be one document, by the way, all kind of combined. Subscription agreements where the investor says, this is how much I want to invest. Then you have an ISQ, which is an investor suitability questionnaire. Are they accredited? Are they sophisticated? Things like that. Kind of a little bit of background about the person, maybe a little bit of their education, things like that. And then you have a company agreement or operating agreement. So it's basically a framework how the LLC is going to operate. So those are some of the documents. You can buy for cash flow and pay market price, right? You can buy for appreciation, meaning like, hey, I just think a couple things. One, you have market appreciation happens without your control. The market just gets better, cap rates go down, people are paying more for properties. Then you have like forced appreciation where you're doing something to the property to increase the NOI, whether that's through improvements or decreasing expenses, things like that. But typically you're going to have a higher return on a deal that's, appreciation deal, more risk, generally speaking, risk reward, pretty much almost every investment just works that way. Cash flow is going to be more where probably not as much appreciation necessarily or the magnitude of it, but it's cash flowing, I would say less risk. There's no question about it. If it's cash flowing from day one versus the property that's not, probably a little bit lower returns overall, but again, less risk and probably less anxiety. You have a blended in between. So it's cash flowing day one, some, maybe not as much as it should. Maybe it's only like, a couple of percent return per year, but you can do a number of improvements. Improvements are relative. Improvements could just be, what, the current owner is horrible and we're going to go in and fix that. The current occupancy is 60%, but the whole submarket's 90%. We're going to go in and lease it up. The property is in a high crime area. We're going to go in and I'd say you probably can't fix that very easily. I've said it before. It's like going into those areas and thinking like, oh, well, I'm just going to put cameras in. I'm going to put whatever, license plate readers. I'm going to put all this stuff in there. Those things are harder to change. Anything that's related to the physical location of it that is not really controllable, but other things like physical characteristics of it, you can, like I said, it could be like we're gonna put like washer and dryer stacks in there, and I talked about that. We're going to, renovate the units. We're going to start charging back for, pet fees and valet trash. They don't do that today, but everyone else in the market does it. Those are all ways you can actually potentially increase the value of the property, right? And you can do that on a cash flowing deal, right? So sources of money to invest, you have cash, obvious, you can just invest cash. IRA, a lot of people will use IRA funds to do this. There's unrelated debt finance income can apply. Just be aware that, in some cases, even though it's retirement, it can be taxed and the normal response is like, well, retirement accounts can't be taxed. It can be using UDFI. You hear the word sometimes UBIT. Just be aware that it's a potential. Doesn't always happen. In-service 401k, where your employer allows you to decide where you put money. It's very rare that the employer will let you do this, but some do. You can borrow money from your 401k as a loan, line of credit like a HELOC, things like that, life insurance policy, cash value, things like that as well. From personal experience, my strong opinion is if you're investing in a deal, whatever deal, multifamily or another deal, and you're borrowing money to do that, then from day one, that deal should cash flow. And I've done it before where, hey, I'm going to borrow money against something that I own, put it into a property with the property should improve, things like that. It doesn't cash flow, but that's okay. Well, lo and behold, you owe the bank monthly, and if that property doesn't perform, you owe the bank the full amount. So a friend of mine, very highly successful guy, he has a line of credit he's getting right now, and it's pretty big. And he was talking to me, about like he might do put some of the money into a development. 18 houses are being developed, and I just said, obviously you do whatever you want with your money, but I can tell you, there's no way I would ever borrow money on a line of credit for a development project that is not going to pay anything for 3 years, if at all. Frankly, right? Who knows what's going to happen with development in 3 years? So wouldn't do it. Just would not do that. This concept of I'm going to borrow money at what 4 or 5% and make 8, 10, 12% on my deal. Yeah, hopefully you do. Fantastic if you do. Times get hard and you're now stuck paying the bank that monthly fee, and then the deal doesn't perform and you're paying them the full amount. I'm not saying never borrow money against a deal. I mean, a lot of people do it, right? But borrow it for deals that actually make sense. And the deal should be most likely lower risk, lower return, but lower risk, lower anxiety, and more predictable that you're likely to get your money back. Tips for investing: read the documents. I mean, is it fun to read a PPM document? It's 100 and whatever, 30 pages or so. Probably not for the average person. Is it fun to lose money on a deal and not get your money back? That's less fun than reading a document, tell you that. Is it fun to get to the end and be like, oh, I invested in a deal, and what are my rights as a investor? Um, you need to know what you're signing. Okay, understand the structure, understand the fees, understand what's called a waterfall, which I'll show you here in a second. Understand there's risk, and you can lose your money. And people are like, well, how can you lose money in real estate? It's happened, and it's happening on a regular basis, by the way. And there are lots and lots of ways to help mitigate that going forward. But it's happening. If you look at a PPM document, the word risk will be in there. I think the one I pulled up a while ago, 69 times the word risk. And the word loss was 71 times. So for a limited partner or investor to say, well, I didn't know there was any risk in this, I'm sorry. I mean, obviously everybody should be sympathetic when a property doesn't perform. No question about it. And it's human nature to look to somebody else to blame. It just is. But to say you don't know that there's risk involved, you didn't know you could lose your money when it's in there, that's in there 20 times. To say, you didn't know real estate could go down when it's in there, umpteen times. To make statements that the sponsor guaranteed and promised a return is frankly a lie, because there's nowhere that, at least from, I can speak for myself, no document I ever had ever out of doing, $1.5 billion in deals where we said we would promise or guarantee anything. You can't even do that, right? I mean, what would be with the guarantee? So, LPs at some point in time need to step up and realize that, they made mistakes too. Now, they relied on somebody, no question about it. And in some cases, some of this indicator did some really bad stuff like illegal type stuff. Yeah, I get that. In other cases, you have syndicators that just got kind of caught in the market with, multiple things all happening with the rate, with rates going up and insurance and rate caps going up and loans being rebalanced for millions and millions of dollars. But doesn't mean that they're bad people or did something deliberately to sabotage a deal. It did happen, right? So LPs need to take responsibility too. Is a GP full time or part time? Their prior experience and track record. Is private equity involved? If it is, where does it sit in position? Is private equity paid back before limited partners? And then you have to just look at risk adjusted returns. You can't just look at two deals my mind and say this one's going to pay 20% return, this one's paying 10, I'm automatically going to default to the one that pays 20%. Probably not a good way of doing that. Your typical deal structure, you as an investor participation will be through a PPM, a company agreement. Company agreement sets forth the voting rights, distribution, timetables, liquidation, sale. So at the very, very top on the right, you have an entity purchasing property LLC and managers of the LLC 30%. In this example, investors are below that. This example. Deal structure with the syndication, investor splits typically going to be 70-80% going to the investors and the remainder going to the general partnership. Could we have multiple classes, for example, a 9% fixed return, no upside? And people used to always ask me this, why would anybody do that? Why would anybody limit their return to just 9%? Well, because they're limiting as much as possible their downside. Because usually this class is being split out here with this fixed 9% as an example, is like 20-25% of the equity. And that class with the 9% gets paid first and is made whole with their money plus their return of 9% before other limited partners participate in any return. So that's why somebody would do it. Preferred return, LPs, between 0 and 8% typically, an asset management fee 1 to 2%. 1%, in my opinion, is ridiculously low. And that's paid for the asset manager overseeing the property, and it's paid based on income collected. So acquisition fee, 1 to 3%. One-time fee paid based on the purchase price. Refinance fee, 0 to 1%. Fee based on the loan amount. Disposition fee when you sell it, 0 to 1%. Fee based on the sales price. And some people might say, and in fact, I was just on a call on Tuesday and with a guy, and he said, yeah, his investors, if there's a refinance fee, as example, they're automatically a no as an investor. That's fine. That's their criteria. I think it's a silly statement. We rarely, I think we did refinance fees, never taken one. I remember 2 out of maybe 120 deals, we had them in there. So it's not something we do on a common basis either. But I could tell you, there was a lot more work. People are like, oh, you just have a mortgage broker do everything, right? No, there is a lot of work doing a refinance on a multifamily property. People can argue with me all day long, but the people can argue with me all day long. If you haven't done it before, I don't really, your argument doesn't really hold much water with me because you have zero experience doing that. You could spend easily, a couple hundred plus hours easily, plus other people on your team spending time doing a refi, and there's just a lot of work involved in it. And then the waterfall, which I'll talk about in a second, it's basically who gets priority and income, proceeds when. Look back, a little more confusing, very rare, but it's basically, let's just say, for example, we have a deal, we're paying investors an 8% preferred return, and there's a 70-30 split. 30% goes to the general partnership. Get to the end of the deal and we sell it and we look to see the pot of money that we have. Well, the preferred return was paid, right? So if you say, well, hey, that's not really a 70-30 split anymore. If we just take 70-30% of the proceeds of the sale, that's not, if you want to say, that's not fair to the general partners because they're actually getting less than 30% because the LPs got their 8% preferred return. So it's basically saying we're going to true it up. We're going to make sure, looking at the money distributions that were paid to LPs and looking at a 70-30 split, what would be a true 30% split to the general partnership team. Not very common, something you should be aware of. Other thing with preferred return you want to be aware of, is it a return of capital or return on capital? So you put $100,000 in a deal with an investment. Let's just make the math easy. You get a 10% preferred return. So you get 10%, $10,000 a year. Your first year ends. And then what do you still have in the deal? Do you have $100,000 in the deal? Or do you have $90,000 in the deal. You need to make sure you understand your investment documents, the difference between a return of capital and return on capital, because they're drastically different. And you say, well, that's not fair. Well, you know what? If it's in the PPM document and you signed it as a limited partner, you know what? It's on you, unfortunately. You, you need to take ownership for it. We don't do that, by the way. We never reduce someone's equity position like that, but people do it. And if you sign the documents, I mean, sorry, but it's just reality. Here's like a waterfall. Fall. Who gets what? The debt's going to be paid first, no question about it, right? And then it's a pure, very simple 80-20 split. No preferred return. A dollar comes out, it's going to be distributed. 80 cents goes to the Class A and the limited partner, and 20% goes to the general partner. Debt here, 80% LP, Class A, 20% GP. 70-30 split with an 8% preferred. You have lender being paid first. Limited partners receive their 8% preferred return first. Is the money left over? Yes or no? That means that's current. I mean, if you weren't paying it as you go, you bring it up. That's typically the way it works, but there is something called, compounding, non-compounding. You understand too. Like, hey, does my preferred return go away if they don't pay me after the year? Yes or no? Does it keep accruing? Yes or no? And if they don't pay me, does it get added to my principal? I mean, not trying to confuse things on this, but I'm telling you, there's so much stuff to this, and most people don't understand even what they're signing, and it's big investments, right? So make sure you understand it. But it's 8% preferred return, then a 70-30 split, 70% LPs, 30 to GP. Example three, 70% 30 split, 10% preferred, no upside. That was the one where I say it was fixed. And then an 8% preferred return to the remainder of the LPs. So let's just say, for example, $1 million being raised and $250,000 of that is in that Class A 10%, fixed 10%. They never make more than that. They could make less if money wasn't there, but they never make more than that. And then the rest of the investors with the, Class A2, they get an 8% preferred return, but only after the group A1 makes their 10%. So the debt gets paid first, LP Class A 10%, and then LP Class A2 8% preferred. If money's left over, 70-30 split. 70% to the GP. I'm sorry, 70% to the LP, and then 30% to the GP. Some questions to ask. How do I know if it's a good deal? You probably don't. I'm not trying to be whatever about it unless you're very, very experienced. You probably don't know if it's a good deal or not. You need to know. And you need to understand to know whether it's a good deal or not. What makes a deal more risky? Lots of things. I mean, the location, the loan terms, the duration, the type of debt, the type of lender, there are other things, crime, all those things make it risky. The vintage of the property, physical characteristics of it, and then you have the people. You could have people when I hear things like, well, this thing can't fail, that thing can't fail. Look, any business, I don't care what business is, most successful business in the entire world can fail because of people. Happens all the time, right? Anytime people are involved, and unfortunately, you have people involved in business, including real estate, that are unethical and do bad things sometimes. Just like you have people in Wall Street that are unethical and do bad things sometimes. It happens. Is my investment liquid? Typically, no, it's not. What is the worst case scenario? Worst case scenario, if you ask, a lead sponsor this, the response of them should be, you could unfortunately lose all your money. That's reality. That's worst case. Okay. Sugarcoat it any other way, it's not being truthful with you. That can happen, and it has happened. Can I be forced to put more money into a deal? Meaning like a capital call, right? No, you can't. Meaning the GPs can't go in your bank account. Now, can they incentivize you through their PPM document and things like that for you to invest? Like If you don't invest, you can get diluted. You don't invest, you can be charged an interest rate based on the amount you didn't invest. There's ways to do that. But no, they can't force you to invest. Am I guaranteed to get a distributions? No. Anybody that says they're guaranteeing your distribution, I wouldn't invest in the deal. There's no way. Unless that person is going to like put all the money required to pay you back and your distributions into some sort of independent third party account and have it sitting there just in the case something happens and that money is legally required to pay you, you say, okay, well, maybe that doesn't happen though. Nobody on the planet would do that. So nobody should be guaranteeing or promising you any type of return at all. Now, hopefully you get that return, but they should not promise you that. Uh, Investor insights, problems, just knowing problems splitting up work with, different vendors. Is it PM company local or not? What's their background, track record? Older buildings just going to have typically issues with plumbing. And then replaced, you're going to have, and that doesn't really increase rent. You put couple hundred grand improving the plumbing doesn't necessarily include the increased rent amount. Chillers, which I mentioned before, is more a machine that heats and cools the entire property. If it's down for everybody. They're expensive and they're not good. CapEx loan issues. We've had so many loan issues just with trying to get money for CapEx. You finish work, you complete the work, you pay the vendors, and then lenders come and inspect, which can take them a while. They play slow games sometimes. Oh, we send me this, send me that. Before you know it, like in some cases, months have gone by. No joke, months, and you're still not reimbursed, and that can have a big impact on cash flow. So is the CapEx coming, from a loan, or is it being raised? Being raised, you have full control over it. Spend it wherever you want, whenever you want, in the areas that need it. You don't have to rely on a lender. Risk adjusted returns, again, I mean, if things sound too good to be true, they probably are. Rinse and repeat if you can. The more you can do in a market with the same property management company, same GP team, things like that, it's good. Now, if you're only in one market only and that market goes down, not good, right? But as much as possible, the insights you can have into all aspects of a submarket is invaluable. What are the pros and cons of the deal? I think anybody leading a deal should be able to specify some cons or concerns that they have with a deal. I mean, I don't know how you can buy a brand new deal, really know nothing about it other than due diligence, and not have some sort of concerns or reservations on it. You should have some concerns. Is extra money being raised? Again, the CapEx being included in the loan or not, and some of the issues I mentioned related to that. What happens to passive money if the deal does not close? Meaning, you wire in money for a deal, there's $5 million raise. They need that much money to close a deal. They raise $3 million. They can't close a deal. What happens? The money should be returned to the investors. Investor insights related to a couple things. Plan on filing an extension. I know some people that are newer to investing in real estate don't like the idea of having to file an extension. K1's not ready on time. I would just say get used to it. Plan on filing an extension. You can scream and fight and be upset all you want, but at the end of the day, sometimes the K1s for tax purposes just are not done on time. It's just reality. Understand the loan terms, whether it's short term, long term, fixed rate, floating rate debt. If it's floating, is there a rate cap? If so, what is it? All those type of things. And again, about the lender, operator, do they sell the loan off? 1031 investors, don't go into a lot of detail on this, other than to say, and I mentioned it previously too, a lot more complicated than you probably think, and a lot more nuances to a 1031 investor in a syndication on both sides, whether you're the sponsor taking money in or you're an investor investing in a deal. Just give you, and there are litany of examples I have and of details. I won't spend a bunch of time on it. Think of this. You're a 1031 investor. The lender says, you are a 1031 investor. You're going to be a key principal guarantor on the loan. Okay. $10 million raise, you put $500,000 in as a 1031 investor. You are now, and the loan is, $15 million, whatever it is. You are now a guarantor on the loan for, if it's bad boy carve out, full recourse, $15 million. And that is every case I've ever seen. It's called joint and several, meaning, let's say myself and two other people are guarantors of the loan. Somebody goes and does something they shouldn't do. They file bankruptcy, where it might be a personal bankruptcy, and now I'm on the hook for full recourse, 15 million, and also the 1031. And like, well, don't they take proportion? Don't they go to the person that did something wrong? No, they don't have to. Don't they go proportionate based on how much money you have, or how much money you have in the deal? No, it's joint and several. They're going to sue whoever they want, whenever they want, everybody they want, and try to squeeze money out. That's just an example. Now and there's tons when you're investing, things you need to know about. Now the reverse side is a syndicator, bring 1031 money in, and they're in the deal. And now you get into a situation where you're going to do a refinance or sale. And I've had situations where I have power of attorney, meaning like Mark Kenny, can sign on behalf of somebody else's 1031 and make the decision to refinance or sell a property. I don't need their permission to do that. I have full authority to do it. I have a couple others where we have not had that, and for certain reasons and things like that. Obviously, the 1031 investor would prefer not for me not to have that control, and I prefer to have the control. But situations where we've done refinances or sale, and two cases where I would just say in reality where 1031 investors tried to blackmail, if you want to say blackmail, and use your leverage. I'm not signing on the refinance unless you move all my money I have invested as 1031 from 3 years ago. I want it all moved up in the capital stack to the top, right below the lender. What? You want what? No, we can't do that. First of all, if we'd have to vote to do that, we would need typically super majority to do that. And it's like, what? One example where property was in trouble. It was. We were we had the lender was going to buy the property, and actually the terms are very favorable. The by far the best hope note, where they let our investors stay in the deal that I've ever seen. Very fair. And we were in a situation where we're like in default on the loan. And one of my partners had a 1031 investor in the deal. That 1031 investor had a sign in order to sell the property. And the conversation went like, you need to sign this deal, to where I was not on the call, but I got the text message, to where this 1031 guy was screaming at the partner of mine on the phone, said he has no plans to sign because he's pissed off, and that this partner could kiss his ass. That's the text message I got. Now, fortunately, he did sign, but I don't want to, Donnie, you're probably like, man, you spend a lot of time on just 1031. Believe me, as a syndicator, you can get screwed bringing 1031 money in if you know what you're doing, like totally screwed. And as a 1031 investor, you can get totally screwed as well if you know what you're doing. So just be careful. So raising capital, we have a whole class we did on this, it's recorded as well. I won't spend a ton of time on this, but the whole thing is you're trying to raise capital. What are you trying to do? Trying to get investors. How do you try to get investors? You go to events, you build relationship. This relationship thing where if people think it's just all business. If you think about some of the people you've met at events and you start talking to them about certain things, whatever it might be, and then the relationships. I go to the gym, regular basis, right? Every day. The number of people I've met at the gym that have turned into business relationships is literally insane. Crazy. In fact, I had 2 calls yesterday with the same guy from the gym. He has 7 businesses. He introduced me to two other opportunities that he has just from talking to him at the gym. That's where I met. We have something in common, right? So having whether it's baseball, football, basketball, you can have those common things and then still talk business, of course, right? Going to events and trying to like if you're like I'm just trying to pitch deals, that doesn't work that way. You need to build relationships first. You need to have your elevator pitch. I'm gonna go on to as far as like, hey, I'm not experienced, right? Yet. So how do they do it, right? Well, they team up with other people that have a story. So he's, hey, my partners and I, this guy, his name Chad, and he's actually in a total different business than real estate. But if I was to come into business with him on an opportunity, it's more in the healthcare, I'd say, hey, my partner, Chad and I, been, we're partnered up. Chad's been doing this for like 25 years, which he has. So do I have the credibility in the health field? No, I don't, but Chad does, and I'm partnered with him. So the concept of like, hey, I'm just a good guy or a nice gal, I'm smart, I'm what that doesn't work. This, you have no credibility, no track record. People aren't going to just give you money. So you have to build relationships with people, go to events, get on social media, post stuff, maybe even like, personal stuff here and there, like, people get an idea who you are, what you do, give content to people, some of it free, of things you've learned. And you're like, well, I don't really have that much experience. You don't have to be in business that long to pick up a couple of things, and you're now that much further ahead than somebody first starting out, and you can share those insights. Be real, be authentic, be vulnerable. I mean, I was on a, I've had partners before that are probably different, a little bit different personalities, and I've had comments before like, partner's kind of salesy, Mark. Kind of like, I'm like, yeah, oh yeah, totally. I get it. I agree. I don't disagree with it. But just being authentic, being yourself, no matter whether you're at an event and how you are outside of an event, how you are on social media, should be the same. Find common denominators. It doesn't have to even be with you. I told you a lot of examples there, but maybe my daughter's into dance, for example. And I meet somebody and we get talking and their daughter is in dance. And then my son was in dirt bikes a lot. I didn't really ride dirt bikes, but I met a number of people just getting talking about like bikes and motorcycles. And then I'm like, oh, my son, he goes track, he does this and that. And you're building these relationships. People want to talk to people about that. And you see, especially if it's like, even in some cases, not their, I'll light up on certain things too, right? I'm passionate about, right? Well, most people hopefully are passionate about their kids. So even if the thing that their child's in, like dance, dude, I love watching my daughter dance. I just love it. I can't dance, but my face will light up if I'm talking to somebody else about my daughter dancing, because I love my daughter and I love watching her do it. Right. So it doesn't have to be you. It could be your kids or a friend or my friend's into whatever music, and he was out traveling on the road and just things like that. Be a connector. This whole concept of like, oh, I don't want to share somebody else's contact information just in case what? Like they do business with somebody else instead of you. Just it's a narrow mindset. Be a connector. I connect people all the time. It's not just with real estate. I mean, I've given my chiropractor, just in fact, this week I gave him to a guy at the gym. He's like, his shoulder's jacked up. Gave it to him. He went there on Wednesday. He's like, "Oh my gosh, the guy was fantastic. Plus, the guy's cash pay, um, and they have a plan. I've given whatever it might be, referrals, connections. People appreciate that. The elevator pitch. You need to know what you were trying to do. You can't just be like, I'm trying to buy multifamily real estate. Way too generic, right? Understand their goals. Now, does the investor have an issue, a tax issue they're trying to solve? Do they have an issue with they're going to retire and they want cash flow? And if so, like you shouldn't be putting them in a deal that's like a value add non-cash flow deal. Do they have, um, other issues or they're basically trying to solve, right? And understanding their goals, investment goals. Do they say, I'm going to invest money with you, but I need my money out in a year? Well, that's not probably going to happen in a multifamily deal, right? So Understanding that, I mean, when you're trying to raise capital, you're like, I just want to raise capital as much as I can, whenever I can, right? I get all that. But reality is that you also have to be aware of what your investor goals are. A partner I message, I mentioned this, like, you know, if you're even an LP in a deal and you're in 1,000 doors, you're like, my partners and I own 1,000 doors. It's true. You are a partner. You're a limited partner in the deal. So that's fine to use. Don't pitch deals, build relationships. I love this. Zig Ziglar. You can have everything in life you want if you will just help other people get what they want. The older I get, the more I realize that too, and the more really enjoyment I get, and some cases satisfaction about trying to help other people um, become better, make less mistakes, not make mistakes I made, whatever area it is. If I can share, with people, I want to be able to do that and help other people. Tips for raising 1031s. If you're going to bring money in, I would ask the 1031 person to put a deposit down, non-refundable. They're like, well, we're looking at three deals. Like, well, we need money on our deal. You basically, it's kind of you're in, you're out. We're going to take a deposit down from you. And if you back out, we're going to keep your deposit. We had examples where people backed out 2, 3 days before closing on 1031s. What's the percent ownership when you're buying versus when you're selling? It's very complicated this way this works. And there are some timing issues on this that you need to be aware of. Raise more money than you think you need because you're probably going to need it. Connect and follow up with people you meet. You go to events, you spend money, you travel, you spend 2, 3 days in an event, you get contact information from people, and then you never follow up with them. It's like what a waste, right? Nothing up, nothing else. Follow up with them. Maybe it doesn't materialize in anything, but follow up with them. You need to have lead generation if you're wanting to raise money. You need to provide things to people. They need to know who you are. You need to provide content to them on a regular basis. Regular is relative. But if the only time they ever hear about you, who you are, is when you need money for a deal, probably not ideal. Attend events, go to meetups, maybe lead your own meetup, provide value, have a podcast, social media. A podcast could be like, well, I don't know enough to have a podcast. All you have to do is have other people on your podcast that know people. And when you're doing that, what also happens is they hopefully are sharing the podcast with their audience, and then their audience knows who you are. And before you know it, it snowballs and compounds. Sign the contract and close. Typically 30 to 50 days for the loan. I mentioned some of that can take longer. 10 to 20 days for after the loan commitment. 40 to 70 days in total. Okay. Here's just a diagram, somewhat quickly go through it, but you submit your LOI, LOI is accepted. There are days on this too. I won't read them all, but give you rough ideas. And you're like, I know a deal that took, yeah, these are just rough ideas, right? Generally speaking. But after the LOI accepted, you receive the contract, attorney, review, red lines, go back and forth. You sign the contract, that becomes the effective date. Now, there's a comment on that. Is the effective date the day you sign the contract, or the effective date the date that's at the top of the contract that says the effective date is this? Big difference. And the reason I say that, these are real examples where there's, let's say, October 15th is in the document, the PSA. We start redlining it. That's the effective date at the top. Then it takes 3, 4 weeks to sign the contract. And you say, well, the effective date's the day we signed. No, not necessarily. The effective date's up at the top where you put it. The effective date should be the date that the contract's fully executed by both parties. But I've seen contracts that it's not the case. So simple little things like that you need to be aware of. Then you have start due diligence, a loan app, title, investor legal docs, due diligence report you get back. It usually takes about 5 days or so. Due diligence period ends. You finalize the docs and send to investors. Investors complete docs, wire funds, and then you close. So, tips on closing: be available and responsive. I can tell you The day you're scheduled to close, probably at least 75% of the time doesn't happen. Lots of reasons why, but it doesn't. But let's just say the day you're supposed to close, you need to be available. You have a W-2 job, you need to make sure your phone is on. And I can tell you a whole bunch of stuff that will happen on the day of closing in most cases. And you need to be very, very responsive. Not like I'll get back to you in 3 hours. Doesn't work that way. You need to be available like to do a wire transfer. If you can't do a big enough wire, you have to go into a bank. And one deal we were closing, the lead guy was like driving around Oklahoma and he's supposed to be doing a wire. And he's like, I'm no joke, an hour and a half away from the nearest bank. It was a Chase Bank. I'm like, what in the world? Like, where are you at for one? Anyways, um, be prepared for surprises. Surprises will happen. No doubt whatsoever. Be prepared to get many, many settlement statements. Like I said, I think we got, definitely gotten well over 60 settlement statements for a single deal. Wire more funds you needed. I mentioned that before. Make sure the PSA terms are included on the settlement statement. What does that mean? Let's say, for example, you just get a credit for vacant units. That needs to be on there. Let's say you put $250,000 earnest money down as a deposit, and for whatever reason, title doesn't have that on there. You need to really understand the money, that's been put in the deal, what credits you should get, what's being prorated for taxes, for property taxes, for example, what's being prorated for rents, all those things. Retrade only when necessary. I mentioned that before. The timing, when to retrade. It's one of those things where, waiting till the last minute to retrade on a deal, right the day of, if you want to say that your money becomes hard, not ideal. If you knew before that, then do it. Piecemealing retrade stuff in is probably frustrating to the average seller, so try to go back with one ask if you can. Give brokers heads up, but the closing, don't piecemeal your requests. I mentioned that. Who fixes what, buyer versus seller before closing, understanding your negotiating power, and then ask for favors sparingly and at the right time. So don't ask for favors just for sake of doing it. But at some point in time, you do enough deals, you're going to ask for favors, but also be willing to give favors too that don't, if you want to say, impact your deal. So, some things I don't care about, right? They don't impact the deal. Other things I do, if the buyer comes back, like on one deal we had, and he wanted $1 million reduction in price, yeah, I'm not giving him that favor. That's not a favor I'm willing to do. If the buyer comes back and says, well, hey, we need, whatever, we need another day for due diligence. Okay, I'm willing to do that. Now, with that extra day, do we add another day to the timeline, or do we say, well, yeah, I'll give you an extra day to due diligence, but the end timeline for closing will still be the same? That's something I just have to think about. I will say the sooner you can close a deal as a buyer or seller, doesn't matter, close it. Time will kill deals. You probably heard that before. I cannot tell you how many things, even right up to the closing day, that have happened that have been close to killing a deal. Don't let time go through. You can have a property where the, stuff starts happening and all this, crap and, with economy and things like that, and the lender doesn't want to do a loan anymore for the buyer. It's legit. It's happened. We've had it happen to us before. 3 days before closing. What do you do, right? So close as fast as you can.